Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. On Halloween night in 1765, hundreds of English colonists from Wilmington, North Carolina, marched in a funeral procession from the center of town to a nearby churchyard. This wasn't your typical funeral procession, as the casket being carried was empty and actually just a stand-in for the concept of liberty. Once the North Carolinians reached the predetermined plot where the Liberty casket was to be buried, a member of the profession went to check the vitals of Liberty, and lo and behold, found that it was in fact still alive in the colonies. This was all a response to the British Crown's Stamp Act, the first direct tax levied on the American colonies after the costly French and Indian War. The taxes affected a variety of different goods, mostly paper products and products that had print on them, ranging from newspapers to gambling dice. Now, the British Crown was pretty isolated from the opinions and views of the average American colonials, or they just didn't really take them that seriously, and so tension would grow for the next decade or so, until finally America was in a full-blown revolution against the British monarchy. The symbolic death of liberty carried out by those patriots in Wilmington, North Carolina was not unique in the history of revolutions. I mean, all throughout revolutionary history, you have agitators and protesters using funerals and this concept of death as a catalyst for a larger movement. And this is something that Andor's show creator Tony Gilroy understands pretty well. Just take a look at Marva's funeral, the climax of season 1. If you listen to interviews with Tony Gilroy, he often talks about how the story of Andor is supposed to be timeless, but at the same time it is inspired and definitely rooted in a lot of contemporary and historical moments and figures.
I get to cherry pick from every revolution. I'm picking the best things and the worst things about every revolutionary movement that I know about.
This is probably one of the main reasons why Andor feels so grounded in reality, despite taking place in a galaxy far, far away. Tony Gilroy has seemingly consumed the entire history of revolutionary movements, and then took many of the key figures, themes, and strategies and introduced them into this neatly packaged and engrossing story we see in Andor. And the funeral procession on Ferrix is really a textbook way to start a revolution. Revolutions generally don't become successful until the average man and woman who keeps society functional, who has things to lose, joins in. And that's because when they leave their job, their employers or employees will feel it. The services that they provided will be missed. And if enough people leave their positions in society, then everything slows down and breaks down. That's really the goal of revolution, to completely halt society or turn it upside down, so that everyone must make a choice whether to support the revolution or go against it. Now, the early adopters of revolutions are usually politically extreme or have no choice but to rebel. This is usually a small percentage of the population, and at these stages, revolutions are very vulnerable. They can be wiped out if these more extreme parts of society are not able to convince the masses to rebel as well. The only problem with an authoritarian system like the Empire is that it's crafty and how it represses the populace. Palpatine didn't head into the office on day one and sign 109 executive orders targeting the individual liberties of all the people he hated and, rewrite the galactic order. That all came later, in small and gradual reforms. Usually people didn't even notice them happening because at the same time, Palpatine was tanking the economy. The Empire from day one was systematically destroying local job markets and replacing it with government jobs, or jobs inside of his military-industrial complex, or jobs in the military. You guys remember that Luthen Rail quote, right? The Empire is choking us so slowly we're starting to not take notice. That's exactly what Palpatine was expecting to happen. Remember, as far as most people were concerned, Palpatine saved the galaxy from the Separatists during the Clone Wars. And so the rise of the New Order, the destruction of the Republic, as alarming as it was still better than being in the middle of a galactic civil war. It takes a long time to radicalize an individual, to convince them to leave their family, to leave their jobs behind, and risk their lives in the front lines of the revolution. I mean, sometimes things happen, like the Empire might, take over an entire city or take over a mine, and you will have people displaced who become refugees who are naturally going to be great recruits for the rebellion. But if you really want to, recruit a large amount of people who are not politically motivated, the best way is to actually just target their emotions. Emotions run high at funerals. I mean, that's why sometimes people crash them. No, but seriously, it's really like one of the few times in our own lives where we have to face our own mortality, right? At a funeral, we are removed from the hamster wheel that is life and work and forced to be present. Funerals also are a sacred thing. Even the ISB isn't going to deny the right for the local people to mourn for Marva, a very important member of the local community. They do try to limit the numbers of people who will show up, but that effort is ultimately futile. Now, gatherings of any kind are a threat to an authoritarian state, and the sons and daughters of Ferrex take full advantage of this situation and use a large gathering to deliver a message from Marva beyond the grave.
The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep.
There's something just incredibly powerful about that speech. If she wasn't in the same TV show as freaking Stellan Skarsgård, I think this monologue would be highlighted even more. But, in universe, like, the speech of a dead person is incredibly powerful, right? When you die, you become immortal, in a sense. Your sins and your more negative attributes are forgiven or at least suppressed at the moment of your death, especially at your funeral. Politicians are lionized, soldiers are recognized as heroes. Generally, no one is going to go up there onto the podium and talk shit about you. Funerals are not only a place to mourn, but it's also a celebration of the life of the individual who has died. In many cases, it's also a celebration of their ideals and beliefs. And if they are political, well, those political ideas are going to get amplified. And this actually kind of reminds me of a very important funeral in our own history. It actually happened in April 1989, just days after I was born. Hu Yaobang, former General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, had passed away from a heart attack. Throughout the 1980s, Yaobang had pursued a series of economic and political reforms in an attempt to liberalize China. He was seen by many young Chinese students as the leader of the reform faction within the Chinese Communist Party. These were individuals who were actually promoting ideas of economic liberalization and, get this, democracy in China. Many of these students would gather at the monument of the people's heroes at Tiananmen Square, like-minded young students who came to say goodbye to a man they all respected. It was only natural that these politically minded students would also start discussing broader political issues like corruption with the current regime, the freedom of press, and of course democracy. China was much freer in the 1980s, and so the idea of a bunch of students gathering at Tiananmen Square to mourn what was a communist official went under the radar. No one really paid much attention to this, at least initially. But in the next few days, more and more students arrived. These were the smartest and brightest individuals in a country just emerging out of the devastating self-inflicted wound that was the Cultural Revolution. In many ways, they were the Chinese people's greatest hope. By April 22nd, when Hu's state funeral took place, there were already close to 100,000 students now marching at Tiananmen Square, ignoring orders from Beijing's municipal government to disperse. The students would occupy Tiananmen Square for almost 2 months before the tanks rolled in and untold numbers of protesters were killed and wounded. No one ever expected the Chinese people to resist against the Chinese Communist Party. No one expected a funeral like this could be the catalyst for such a movement. Just like how Dedra Miro never expected the Ferrex funeral to explode in her face as well. Heck, I'm not even sure if the rebels knew it was going to happen. Another great example of a funeral procession turning into a rebellion would be the June Revolution in Paris in 1832. This was a far more organized movement. You had all these Republican-backed secret societies who were plotting against the monarchy. And when I say Republican, I don't mean American Republicans. Remember, this is the 1800s in France. You're talking about people who advocate for a republic versus an absolute monarchy. The political spectrum was different at the time. Anyway, Jean-Maximilien Lamarck, a leading opposition figure in the French Parliament, contracted cholera and died on June 1st, 1832. He was fighting for individual liberty, human rights, against, again, a pretty crazy king who believed he had a divine right to rule over the French people. The same cholera that had killed him had also killed 100,000 people across France. In Paris, 18,402 people died, mostly individuals living in poorer neighborhoods, which of course led to conspiracies spreading out that the monarchy was trying to kill poor people. That most likely was not true. Lamarck's public funeral was scheduled for June 5th, and several political groups aligned with the Republican movement took over the funeral procession and literally redirected it to the Bastille, where the French French Revolution had begun, many years earlier. The other Republican conspirators were joined by more than 3,000 Parisians and also pro-Republican refugees from all across Europe who were basically staying in Paris. The rebellion was short-lived as the larger Paris population never joined the ranks of the 3,000, and the French monarchy would assemble an army of more than 60,000 army and militiamen to crack down on the insurgency. Now, thanks to the close quarters and narrow streets of the area where most of the fighting took place, the skirmishes were quite brutal and costly to both sides. The June rebellion would ultimately fail, and yes, this is what Les Mis is based on. I hope Congo is using clips from the movie as I'm talking about it. And by the way, in many of the real-life protests that I've been to, all around the world, usually when you have a bunch of protesters standing at a barricade, it's very likely they'll start singing Do You Hear the People Sing, which is one of the main songs from Les Mis. So there you go. Art is, again, bleeding into real life here. Now, the one thing you might notice here is that in two of these funeral procession turned revolutions, the instigators end up failing. I would argue that if a revolution uses a funeral to cover up the beginning of its movement, it probably means that the central government they are facing is already closely watching the people, and the agitators have no choice but to exploit that last bit of humanity in their opponents. Even though most authoritarian regimes understand that people have to mourn, and this is what smart and cunning rebels take advantage of. But again, this is a desperate move. This is a move you pull off when you're facing extreme odds, and I think this is why a lot of these funeral revolutions ultimately fail. And I guess the real question I have now is, how many people actually knew that Marva's funeral procession would include such a rousing anti-imperial speech? I mean, did Brazo know that he was about to turn into a one-man wrecking ball? Did the daughters of Ferrex know about the contents of Marva's speech? Did B2 emo? Or is this all just one spontaneous movement, so visceral, natural, and dare I say necessary, that no one knew they were going to rebel until the moment they decided to? So there you have it. That is how revolutionaries use funerals to hide their true intentions and launch massive movements. I think it's brilliant that they did this in Andor. I love seeing real history bleed into science fiction. It's what makes Andor so grounded and real. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.